"The floor's good enough for you," she said, without looking up. I stood frozen in the doorway, her words slicing through the air like ice. Once, I'd been her world, but now, I was nothing more than an afterthought, a shadow in her perfect life. For the first time, something inside me snapped. I spent years molding my life around hers, sacrificing dreams, quieting my own voice. But that night, the silence broke. I would no longer be invisible. By the time the sun set, I wasn't just walking away. I was building something bold, something that was mine. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. It wasn't the first time I'd been disrespected, but when she said it, "The floor's good enough for you," something in me snapped. She barely glanced up from her phone as she spoke. "You can sleep here," she said, pointing vaguely to the hardwood near the dresser. "The floor's good enough for you." I stood there for a second too long, blinking at the pile of folded blankets she'd dropped on the ground like she was feeding the dog. I managed a nod, silent, tight, and murmured, "Sure." My voice didn't even sound like mine. It was softer, smaller. By the time I bent down to spread the blanket out, she was gone. Her voice echoed faintly from the hallway, already on the phone again, cheerful and busy. The floor, like it was natural, like that's where I belonged. The quilt was thin and smelled of starch, barely masking the sharp chill that rose from the wood. I didn't bother with the air mattress leaning half deflated in the corner. She hadn't even tried to set it up. That was the part that stung, how effortless it was to disregard me. I lowered myself down, each joint protesting, and sat for a long time on that cold floor. Around me, the room was sterile, no warmth, no life, just pristine walls, neutral tones, a carefully arranged bouquet on the dresser. Nothing personal, nothing real, not a single picture of us. I used to fill her world. Her drawings in elementary school were always of us. Me holding her hand, me brushing her hair. I remembered the way she'd cry into my lap after nightmares, and the way I stayed up every single night during flu seasons, forehead to hers, whispering her through the fever. I gave up everything for her. My art school admission, my social life, a second chance at love. I poured all of it into making her feel safe, seen, important, and now I was furniture. I wrapped my arms around my knees and looked toward the window. Outside, dusk stretched across a cul-de-sac lined with porch lights and trimmed hedges. A woman walked a small dog past the window, humming. Inside, I felt like a ghost. Then her voice carried through the hallway again. "Yeah, she's here. She's easy. Super low maintenance." Honestly, I barely know she's here. Low maintenance. My stomach turned. I didn't know what hurt more, the fact that she'd said it, or the fact that I'd let her think it was true, that I'd made myself so convenient, so invisible, she didn't see me anymore. I stood up and walked to the mirror above her dresser. My reflection startled me. Older than I imagined, not old, just worn. My mouth a little downturned, my shoulders a little too careful. I had become a shape in the background of her life, a utility, a function, a plug-in mother. Something inside me shifted. I walked slowly to my suitcase in the corner. I hadn't even unpacked. Maybe I knew. Maybe, deep down, I sensed this trip would open a wound I could no longer ignore. I zipped it closed, feeling each tooth of the metal catch like a breath held too long. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I wouldn't stay here. Not like this. Not on the floor of my own daughter's life. Lena rested her hand on the suitcase handle, eyes fixed on the hallway. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but clarity. One thought pulsed louder than the rest. If she didn't stand up now, she might never remember how. I wasn't going to beg for respect. If she wanted to treat me like this, I would show her what it feels like to lose control. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there on the floor, curled beneath a blanket that didn't reach my feet, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun with an indifferent rhythm. My mind ran like an engine that wouldn't shut off. Her words echoed, low maintenance, just the floor, barely know she's here. Like I was a ghost, someone had forgotten to bury. But I wasn't going to beg. I'd begged for scraps of attention my entire adult life, from Jenna, from her father, from people who only remembered me when they needed something. I had shrunk myself until I barely cast a shadow. Not anymore. When dawn broke, I slipped out before anyone woke. I didn't slam doors. I didn't leave a note. I just walked out with my suitcase and dignity intact, past the espresso machine I bought her last Christmas, past the untouched gift basket I brought with homemade preserves, past the version of me that would have stayed quiet. The morning air was brisk. It snapped against my cheeks as I walked to my car. I sat behind the wheel and exhaled slowly, hands tight on the steering wheel. Where do you go when you don't belong anywhere? I didn't have the answer, but I knew what I didn't want. I didn't want to be someone whose presence was tolerated. I didn't want to vanish into someone else's life. So I drove, past the neighborhood park where Jenna took her first steps, past the elementary school drop-off, where I'd cried the day she walked in alone. I kept going until the streets looked unfamiliar, until I wasn't just circling memory. Eventually I found myself back in Jenna's neighborhood, idling at a stop sign near her cul-de-sac. That's when I saw it, the house next door to hers. Vacant. The grass was overgrown, windows streaked with grime, a sagging porch step begging for repair. A for sale sign leaned awkwardly to one side. It looked forgotten, but there was something about it, something bold in its bones. I stared at that house like it had spoken to me. And then, the idea came. It didn't arrive gently. It struck sudden, sharp, like cold water to the face. What if I bought that house? What if I didn't run, but rooted? I turned off the engine and got out, walked across the patchy lawn. I peered through the dusty front window. The interior was gutted, walls bare, old carpet torn up, but it had space and potential. Suddenly, I could see it, me rebuilding it, not just for shelter, but as a declaration, a place of my own, right beside hers, not to intrude, but to remind her, I wasn't gone, I wasn't invisible, I was right here, and I was building something too. The idea of a pool bloomed next, luxurious, defiant, positioned perfectly to face her bedroom window, not for revenge, for recognition, a sparkling sunlit reminder that I could still create beauty, that I mattered. I pulled out my phone and opened the calculator app. I began rough numbers, savings, potential loan offers, costs of renovations. It wasn't crazy, risky, yes, but not impossible. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something stir in me. Control. I had been generous for decades, selfless to the point of erasure. But I had resources, I had taste, and I had a reason, not to punish, but to reclaim. Lena stood in the overgrown front yard of the vacant house, the for sale sign swaying beside her. She stared at the house, then turned her gaze to Jenna's perfect white porch just a few feet away. With a breath that tasted like resolve, she whispered, "Let's see what happens when I stop disappearing." Once I made up my mind, there was no turning back. The house was mine. Now it was time to turn it into a statement. The next morning, I called the number on the faded for sale sign. My voice barely trembled, even as my heart raced. A polite woman named Teresa answered, her tone clipped and efficient. "Yes, it's still on the market," she said. "It's a fixer-upper, which is why it's been sitting so long. But if you're serious, I can meet you in an hour." I was. We walked through the house together. The smell of Maldo hit me the second I stepped inside, but I didn't flinch. Teresa talked about plumbing and permits, her voice echoing off bare studs. I nodded along, eyes tracing the bones of each room, kitchen walls ready to be torn down, sunlight waiting to be let in. When we reached the back patio, I paused. There it was, Jenna's house, not even 50 feet away. Her second-story bedroom window stared down like a watchtower. I felt the heat rise in my chest again, but this time it wasn't pain, it was purpose. Teresa cleared her throat. "It needs vision," she said gently. "I have plenty of that," I replied. By noon, I'd called my bank. Between my savings and the modest inheritance I'd tucked away after Richard passed, it was doable. I didn't need permission. I didn't need applause. The next day, I signed the papers. A week later, I held the keys in my hand. Cold, rusted, perfect. As I stepped through the front door officially for the first time, it felt surreal. The house groaned around me like it was waking from a long sleep. The floors creaked. The air buzzed with silence. It was mine. I walked from room to room, talking aloud like I used to in art studios years ago. Take this wall out. Skylight here. Built-in shelves along this side. I could already picture it: light oak floors, airy curtains, rich paint tones, a kitchen made for wine and laughter. This wasn't about being seen anymore. This was about claiming space. My space. I opened my laptop that evening and typed in luxury pool designs. It felt ridiculous and thrilling. I clicked through models, filtering for ones that emphasized symmetry and clean lines. I chose one with curved tile edges and underwater lights, the kind that would glow blue into the night, a mirror of the life she thought I didn't have. It would sit in the backyard, centered, right where Jenna couldn't miss it. By midweek, I'd met with 2 contracts. One was pushy and dismissive, calling me sweetheart and patting my shoulder. I tossed his card in the trash the moment he left. The second was a woman, Tamara, who wore paint-stained jeans and listened more than she spoke. She understood what I wanted, not just renovation, restoration. Statement house, she said. Got it. We shook hands. Jenna still had no idea. She called once that week, about centerpieces. I let it go to voicemail. I watched from behind my curtain as she pulled into her driveway, phone to her ear, eyes glued to her reflection in the side mirror. Her world was still untouched, still perfect, still centered on her. But mine was changing. At night I sat on a folding chair in the empty living room, a small lamp, plugged into an extension cord beside me. The walls echoed, the air was cool, and I was finally starting to breathe. Lena stood alone in the unfinished living room, bare feet on plywood, heart beating in quiet sync with the house's groans. She looked toward the front window, knowing the construction would start tomorrow. And when the trucks rolled in, hammers pounding, ground shaking, Jenna's silence would be the first thing to crack. Once I made up my mind, there was no turning back. The house was mine. Now it was time to turn it into a state. The next morning, I called the number on the faded for sale sign. My voice barely trembled, even as my heart raced. A polite woman named Teresa answered, her tone clipped and efficient. Yes, it's still on the market, she said. It's a fixer-upper, which is why it's been sitting so long. But if you're serious, I can meet you in an hour. We walked through the house together. The smell of Maldu hit me the second I stepped inside, but I didn't flinch. Teresa talked about plumbing and permits, her voice echoing off bare studs. I nodded along, eyes tracing the bones of each room, kitchen walls ready to be torn down, sunlight waiting to be let in. When we reached the back patio, I paused. There it was, Jenna's house, not even 50 feet away. Her second-story bedroom window stared down like a watchtower. I felt the heat rise in my chest again, but this time, it wasn't pain, it was purpose. Teresa cleared her throat. It needs vision, she said gently. I have plenty of that, I replied. By noon, I'd called my bank. Between my savings and the modest inheritance I'd tucked away after Richard passed, it was doable. I didn't need permission. I didn't need applause. The next day, I signed the papers. A week later, I held the keys in my hand, cold, rusted, perfect. As I stepped through the front door officially for the first time, it felt surreal. The house groaned around me like it was waking from a long sleep. The floors creaked. The air buzzed with silence. It was mine. All mine. I walked from room to room, talking aloud, like I used to in art studios years ago. Take this wall out. Skylight here. Built-in shelves along this side. I could already picture it: light oak floors, airy curtains, rich paint tones, a kitchen made for wine and laughter. This wasn't about being seen anymore. This was about claiming space. My space. I opened my laptop that evening and typed in luxury pool designs. It felt ridiculous and thrilling. I clicked through models, filtering for ones that emphasized symmetry and clean lines. I chose one with curved tile edges and underwater lights, the kind that would glow blue into the night, a mirror of the life she thought I didn't have. It would sit in the backyard, centered right where Jenna couldn't miss it. By midweek, I'd met with 2 contracts. One was pushy and dismissive, calling me sweetheart and patting my shoulder. I tossed his card in the trash the moment he left. The second was a woman, Tamara, who wore paint-stained jeans and listened more than she spoke. She understood what I wanted, not just renovation, Statement house, she said. Got it. We shook hands. Jenna still had no idea. She called once that week. About centerpieces. I let it go to voicemail. I watched from behind my curtain as she pulled into her driveway, phone to her ear, eyes glued to her reflection in the side mirror. Her world was still untouched, still perfect, still centered on her, but mine was changing. At night I sat on a folding chair in the empty living room, a small lamp plugged into an extension cord beside me. The walls echoed. The air was cool, and I was finally starting to breathe. Lena stood alone in the unfinished living room, bare feet on plywood, heart beating in quiet sync with the house's groans. She looked toward the front window, knowing the construction would start tomorrow. And when the trucks rolled in, hammers pounding, ground shaking, Jenna's silence would be the first thing to crack. Just when I thought I was in control, Jenna turned up at my door with a demand that threatened to derail everything. The sound of hammers and saws became the rhythm of my mornings. Each clang, each grind of machinery felt like punctuation on a sentence I was finally writing for myself. The frame of the pool curved into the backyard, a silver skeleton waiting to be filled. My sanctuary was taking shape. Tamara's crew worked like a symphony, focused, unbothered, determined. I passed among them with my coffee, invisible in the best way, not ignored, respected. It was a new kind of silence, one I hadn't earned by being small. Sometimes, I'd catch a flicker of Jenna's blinds shifting. She was watching, always watching. I never waved. I didn't need to. That morning the trucks had arrived early, and by noon, the sound of concrete mixing filled the block. I stood barefoot on the front porch, sipping coffee, and breathing in the smell of fresh lumber and upheaval. The house had no kitchen, no insulation, barely a roof, but it had movement. It had life. It had me. Then came the slam of my front door. You've got to be kidding me. Jenna's voice cracked through the air like a whip. I turned as she barreled inside, heels tapping like gunfire against the plywood floor. She looked beautiful and furious, lipstick perfect, face flushed. You bought this house? She demanded, not waiting for a greeting. You're really building that pool right where I have to see it every day? I am. I said, calmly. This is a joke, right? You're doing this to make a point? No, Jenna. I'm doing it to make a home. Her laugh was hollow. You couldn't just be happy for me. You had to steal the spotlight. During my wedding month, do you know how this makes me look? I walked over to the blueprints and smoothed the edge. I wasn't aware your wedding came with zoning rights. She stepped closer. Either you stop this construction, or you're out of the wedding. Gone. Done. I'll make sure of it. I held her gaze. Then I guess that decision's already been made. Her mouth tightened. She crossed her arms, lowered her voice. I'll get lawyers. You think I'm bluffing? This is harassment. Obstruction. You're violating my privacy. I froze, not from fear but from the flash of clarity her words gave me. Jenna could drag this into legal hell, and she might. She had the money, the team, the cold-eyed advisors who whispered in her ear about loopholes and injunctions. Permits could be revoked, projects delayed, construction shut down until I drowned in red tape. I had already committed everything. I couldn't afford a war, but here she was, making it one. Still, I didn't back away. If that's what you feel you need to do, I said, then go ahead. She looked at me, blinking, like she'd expected fear, compliance, tears. Instead, she found a woman rooted. Fine, she snapped. But don't say I didn't warn you. She turned and stormed out, her heels thudding against wood, the door slamming behind her like a gun. Silence returned. But it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the kind that comes right before a storm. I stood still for a long moment, my fingers curled tight against my sides. My body trembled, not with regret, but with the raw voltage of standing on the edge of something irreversible. I walked to the window. Jenna's porch looked just like it had, spotless, untouched. But I was no longer the woman she remembered. I had poured too much into this place to turn back now. Lena stood in the sawdust haze, knuckles white on the windowsill, heart rattling against her rib. Doubt whispered, but resolve roared louder. This was her last stand, and she would not be erased. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about showing my daughter that I deserved to be treated with respect. The house kept growing louder, but Jenna had gone quiet. Each day brought new noise, tile saws screeching, concrete trucks groaning. nail guns popping like fireworks. Workers passed through my yard in a rhythm of grit and sweat, building something I'd dreamed of and feared in equal measure. The pool was nearly done now, its skeleton lined, its tiles gleaming under a thin coat of dust. It shimmered with anticipation, almost there, but inside me, the weight pressed harder. Jenna hadn't spoken to me since she slammed the door. Not a call, not a text, just silence. And when I did see her, across driveways or at brief family gatherings, she made sure that silence followed me in like a shadow. At her cousin Brielle's engagement dinner, she didn't even look in my direction. I brought a gift, wore the earrings she'd once complimented, and smiled through small talk with relatives who sensed the tension, but said nothing. Jenna sat 2 seats away laughing loudly with people who didn't matter. She made a point of acting like I wasn't there. I kept my fork steady, my voice measured, but my chest ached from the effort. Back at the house, I threw myself into the work. The painters needed decisions. The landscaper had questions. Tamara brought tile samples and timeline updates. I chose bold colors, deep greens, bronze accents, slate gray for the front porch. It wasn't subtle, and I didn't want it to be. Still, I couldn't stop watching her window. Sometimes I'd catch her standing behind the curtain, arms crossed, mouth tight. She never waved. Neither did I. Margot came by with muffins one afternoon and found me on the back steps with a clipboard and dirt on my jeans. "She's not speaking to you?" she asked, sitting beside me. Not even a blink. Margot sighed. "She's stubborn. I wonder where she got it," I said, not smiling. Margot hesitated. "You sure this is worth it?" The question stung. I didn't answer. Another friend, Tanya, called later that week. "You're making a point," she said. "But is it worth your relationship with your daughter?" I thanked her for her concern and hung up. Not angrily, just tired. They didn't understand. This wasn't about a pool. It wasn't about property lines, or centerpieces, or noise It was about the years I'd spent erasing myself to make Jenna's life seamless. And now that I had stepped out of that shadow, she wanted me gone. But I wasn't gone. I was right here. Still, the silence clawed deeper. Late one night, I sat by the window, watching lights flicker in Jenna's bedroom. She was pacing, on the phone, her silhouette tight with motion. The pool reflected the glow faintly, a mirror she couldn't quite avoid. I wondered then if I'd gone too far. Had I ruined everything? Had I drawn a line that couldn't be crossed again? I turned away and looked around the living room. My living room. There was music playing softly in the background. The walls were half painted, and the smell of fresh stain hung in the air. It wasn't finished, but it was mine. And for the first time in my life, that had to be enough. The pool sparkled in the moonlight, nearly finished, silent as the air around it. Lena stared at the reflection in its surface, hers not Jenna's, and felt the weight of her daughter's silence grow heavier. It wasn't noise she feared anymore. It was what Jenna might be planning next. The wedding day was upon us, and the tension was unbearable. But what I didn't expect was the next bombshell. By the time the wedding week arrived, the pool behind my house was finished. Water blue, crystal clear and impossible to ignore. It sat like a jewel in the earth, reflecting the sky, the windows, the silence. Jenna's bedroom faced it direct. She'd taken to keeping her blinds drawn, but I could still feel her eyes when I walked barefoot across the deck in the morning, coffee in hand, robe tied loose around my waist. I didn't perform for her. I didn't have to. My life had become louder in its quiet than her chaos ever was. The house was mine now, fully furnished and unapologetically bold. Art on the walls, open shelves in the kitchen, books stacked on end tables. No one's rules but mine. Still, the tension stretched like a wire pulled too tight. At the grocery store, Jenna passed me without a word. At a family brunch, she laughed with exaggerated brightness when I walked in. Her silence had turned to strategy, snide remarks delivered through other people, text forwarded from her bridesmaids, a thinly veiled message in every glance. She even sent a note by courier, no less, asking for the gift I planned to give at the wedding. Not an invitation, not a question, just a demand. I read it twice, then fed it into the shredder. That night, I poured a glass of wine and floated in the pool under the stars. For the first time in my life, I felt completely unowned. Margot called, concerned. "You're still going to the wedding, right?" "If I'm allowed," I said. "You're her mother." That hasn't meant much lately. But still, I had the dress. Pale silver, modest, elegant. I'd bought it months ago when I thought I'd be standing at her side, not across a property line. The day before the wedding, Jenna's house buzzed with activity. Delivery trucks, makeup artists, photographers hauling gear. My street was transformed into a photo shoot backdrop I wasn't invited to. I spent the day planting wildflowers along my fence. When the morning of the wedding arrived, the air was thick with heat and pressure. My phone buzzed with well wishes from distant relatives, and Margot's nervous emoji-riddled text. I sipped my coffee, watching the neighbor's cat strut along the edge of my pool. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was exhausted and free. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I nearly let it go, but something made me answer. "Hello? Mrs. Hale?" a voice asked. Calm, but strained. "This is Nathan, Jenna's fiancé." My stomach clenched. "Yes?" There was a pause too long for comfort. "I know this is strange," he said, "but I need your help." I stood frozen, coffee cooling in my hand. "She's falling apart," he continued. "Something's off. She's crying, lashing out at the planner, saying everything's ruined. She won't talk to anyone. I think you're the only person who can calm her down." My mind raced. Nathan had never called me before, never once reached out on his own. And now, minutes before their vows, he was asking me to step in and save the day. "She's not listening to anyone," he said again, quieter this time. "She keeps saying it's your fault." I looked out the window toward her house, white roses tied to the railing, a veil fluttering in the wind. I didn't move. "She needs her mother," he said. Lena lowered the phone slowly, heartbeat pulsing in her ears. She stared across the lawn, where guests were beginning to arrive. Her daughter was unraveling on her wedding day, and suddenly, the power was hers. But would she use it to rescue Jenna? Or reclaim herself once and for all? I wasn't going to back down. This wasn't just about a pool anymore. It was about my dignity. I stood at the window, Nathan's voice still ringing in my ear. I could picture her inside, pacing like a caged animal, tearing at the veil someone had probably pinned too tightly. She was unraveling, and for once I wasn't holding the thread. I didn't call back. Instead, I got dressed. The silver gown fit differently now, less like a symbol of hope and more like armor. I brushed my hair, applied light makeup and clasped the necklace I'd worn the day she graduated high school. A tiny pearl she gave me when she still knew how to love without control. I walked across the lawn when the music began. Guests turned to look, some nodding in polite surprise, others shifting uncomfortably. Jenna didn't see me at first, too busy whispering harshly to the maid of honor, her eyes darting like a cornered fox. I took my seat in the back row. No drama, no speech, just presence. I wasn't here to save anyone. I was here to exist, fully, quietly, unapologetically. The ceremony began. Jenna stood at the altar, radiant in spite of herself. Her smile twitched at the edges, not quite reaching her eye. Nathan looked calm, but distant, like someone clinging to a script they hadn't rehearsed enough. I watched, not with resentment, but with a strange kind of clarity. This wasn't my moment. It wasn't even hers. Not really. It was a performance sewn together by expectation. But I wasn't performing anymore. When the officiant asked for vows, Jenna's voice trembled. She glanced toward the crowd, caught sight of me and froze. For a beat too long, everything stilled. Then she continued, words robotic, hands tight around the bouquet. I didn't flinch. After the ceremony, I stayed in my seat. I didn't join the line for photos. I didn't approach the bride. I simply watched as people buzzed around her, taking selfies, offering compliments, congratulating without really seeing. She looked over at me again. Once no warmth, just confusion, maybe even fear, because I wasn't playing my part, and that unsettled her more than anything else I could have done. Back at my house, The evening sun had dipped below the trees. The pool shimmered like it always had. Calm, unapologetic, impossible to ignore. I kicked off my shoes and walked along the edge barefoot, dress swishing against my ankles, the weight of the day sliding off my shoulders. I had survived the wedding. I had survived motherhood in its messiest form. I didn't know if Jenna and I would ever speak again, but I knew this. I had done what I needed to do. Not for her. For me. The wind stirred. A flower petal from her wedding arch floated over the fence, landing in the water. It bobbed there like an offering. I didn't touch it. Then my phone rang. An unknown number again. I answered without thinking. Hello? Hi. This is Mark, the voice said. I manage site maintenance for the wedding venue down the road. Yes? I'm sorry to call so late, but I thought you should know. We had a visitor today. Someone from your address. There was an incident. Something with the fence near your pool. You might want to take a look. Lena's grip tightened on the phone as she turned toward the back gate. The wind had picked up and the water looked different now. Still but not peaceful. She walked toward it slowly, dread coiling in her chest. Whatever Jenna hadn't said at the altar, she might have just expressed another way. The phone call I received that day changed everything. I never thought it would come to this. I stepped outside barefoot, the gravel biting at my heel. The wind had shifted, and the air felt heavier than it should. The pool shimmered under the porch light, but something about it seemed wrong. The back gate was slightly ajar. I scanned the fence line, heart ticking faster. No broken boards, no damage, just the whisper of something unsettled. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just a flower petal caught in the pump. Maybe it was Jenna making her presence known in a way only she could. Quiet and sharp. I returned inside and locked the door. The next morning, the second call came. This time it was Nathan again. Lena, he said softly. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I sat down. She called it off. He said, last night, around midnight, she told me she couldn't do it, that everything felt wrong, that it was all falling apart. I said nothing. She said she wasn't ready, that she needed space, that she needed to figure herself out. Curled. The words echoed through me. Jenna had ended her wedding. Not postponed it. Ended it. Everything she'd built, paraded, controlled, undone in a single night. And somehow I was at the center of the collapse, not as a saboteur, but as a mirror, one she couldn't stop looking into. I don't blame you, Nathan added, almost in a whisper. I think you woke her up. I just wish it hadn't taken so long. He hung up before I could speak. I sat there, staring at the empty wineglass from the night before, the silence around me thick as fog. I didn't know what I felt. Relief, sadness, triumph, maybe all of it. I walked to the pool. The reflection of the sky stared back at me, unblinking. I thought of her veil, her vows, the crowd that never saw her fully. I thought of the girl who used to curl up next to me on stormy nights and ask if monsters were real. What had I become? What had she? Later that afternoon, my phone rang again. Hi, Jenna said. One syllable. No arm. Her voice was low, unsteady. I didn't know who else to call, she said. Everyone's gone. Nathan, the vendors, the guests. They all left. She paused. I let the silence stretch. I made a mess, she said finally. I need help. The last word barely came out. I sat down on the couch, the sun falling in through the windows, casting long lines across my floor. The house smelled like fresh paint and lavender oil, a space I had built with my own hands. You still there? She asked. I closed my eyes. I had wanted this moment for weeks, months. A crack in her pride, a moment where she needed me not out of obligation, but truth. But now that it had come, I wasn't sure. Would stepping in now mean giving up everything I'd fought for? Or was this the moment all of it was meant to lead to? Lena stood at the edge of her living room, phone pressed to her ear, Jenna's voice trembling on the other end. The pool glittered outside like a second chance. But whose was it? And could she take her daughter's hand, without losing herself again? I never thought I'd be faced with this choice, but it was time to decide who I wanted to be. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, the phone still warm in my hand. Jenna's voice lingered like steam on a mirror, foggy, uncertain, but real. For weeks I had prayed for that call, and now that it had come, I wasn't sure if it was a rescue rope or a noose. I wandered into the living room. The afternoon light streamed across the floor I'd chosen, the armchair I'd reupholstered, the painting I'd hung above the fireplace. Everything in the room whispered of freedom. My life, rebuilt plank by plank without her permission. Now she wanted in. I sat down on the couch and stared at the fireplace until the silence hummed in my ears. Margot stopped by without calling, carrying coffee and a knowing look. She set the cup in front of me and raised an eyebrow. She needs help, I said. My voice cracked more than I liked. Help, she repeated. Not rescuing. There's a difference? Margot sat across from me and folded her hands. Only if you make one. I leaned back, eyes closed. She's always been a little lost, Lena. You just used to be her map. I thought about that, about what it meant to stop guiding someone, to let them wander, to watch them fall without cushioning the blow. She's not a child anymore, I said. No, Margot agreed, but she still needs a mother. By late afternoon, I found myself on Jenna's porch again, the one with the chipped paint and wilting petunias. My feet paused at the step. My heart didn't want to move forward, but it didn't want to turn back either. She opened the door slowly. Her eyes were swollen, her voice small. You came. I'm here, I said, and that was enough. We sat across from each other at her kitchen table. No grand speeches, no soft music, just a hum of the refrigerator and the quiet ache of too many things unsaid. She looked down at her hands. I was afraid of turning into you, she said, her voice barely audible. That old pain could have flared, but it didn't. I understand, I said. You gave up everything for me. I didn't want that life. I didn't either, I replied, and her head snapped up. She blinked. You didn't. I wanted love. I wanted art. I wanted to matter to more than just one person, but I chose motherhood. I chose you, and I resented you for it, she whispered. I nodded, and I resented you back. Silence stretched between us, deep and sharp. Then she said, I don't know how to fix it. We don't fix it, I said. We start from where we are. She inhaled shakily. Is that allowed? It has to be. A long pause followed. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was contact. I still don't know who I am without the wedding, she said. You'll find out. That's the beautiful part. She smiled, faint and broken. Do you think we can try again? I didn't answer right away. My eyes drifted toward the window, where the edge of the pool just barely shimmered. Jenna's fingers curled around Lena's, unsure but present. Lena looked at her daughter, this stranger she'd once known so well, and nodded slowly. We can but in her chest, a quiet question bloomed. If they rebuild together, what part of her own new life would have to be torn down? I thought I was done being a mother in the background, but sometimes the right thing is to stand beside her. I sat on my porch swing that evening, dusk settling over the water of the pool. It glowed softly, a pale lantern floating in the dimming light. The surface that once reflected my stubborn pride now shimmered with possibility. Jenna stepped out onto the deck, robe wrapped tight around her, eyes cautious. She paused near the edge, by the new rock garden I'd planted that morning, bluebells and foxglove, nodding in the breeze. We could do this together, she said quietly. My heart contracted at the word. What do you mean? She took a tentative step closer. I want to move in next door, share the house, live near you, start fresh, with boundaries, honesty. My palms tightened around the swing's rope as I tried to breathe. She was suggesting the very thing I had worked so hard to establish: space, ownership, identity. And now she was asking to cross that divide voluntarily. She continued, voice softer. That pool, it doesn't feel like control anymore. It feels like a new beginning. A tremor of relief and fear coursed through me. I had built a life on breaking patterns. Now I was being asked to erase one, not from vengeance, but from healing. I stood and walked to her. Neither of us spoke. The wind whispered between us. The pool light flickered beneath our feet. I took her hand, warm and uncertain. "You're offering to move in with me. I want to try," she said. "Not because I need you. Because I want you." My throat burned. Tears stung at the corners of my eyes. She was choosing me again, with her voice, not her demands. Inside we moved slowly, packing boxes, clearing closets, picking paint swatches. There was laughter too. Awkward at first, then easier when we both realized we were no longer afraid to take up space. She painted one wall in her favorite coral shade. I chose deep teal for the living area. We bought identical armchairs for the sunroom, and sketched plans for a small herb garden in the backyard corner. The dynamics shifted. She cooked dinner one night, her pasta sauce spicy and fragrant, and we ate together at my kitchen table for the first time in months. She asked about my art supplies stored in the garage. I told her which of my canvases she could paint over or not. It wasn't mother and daughter. It was partners, equals. Some afternoons, she sat at the pool edge with her feet dipped in, reading aloud from a dog-eared novel we both loved. I hung wind chimes near the deck, their gentle tinkle drifting across the water and into her silent corners. Wedding plans dissolved entirely. Nathan hadn't called again. No planners, no rehearsals, no centerpieces. There was quiet, and I realized it wasn't emptiness. It was space to breathe. One morning, Jenna stood beside me, under the pergola we built together. She looked at the pool, the house next door at me. That you've done all this, means something," she said softly. "It shows that you matter." She smiled a little. "And maybe I do too." My chest tightened, not with pride, but with gratitude. As evening fell, I walked back toward my own home with her beside me. We paused at the gate between properties. It looked different now. Painted gray, with lanterns hung for both porches. No fence, no distance. "I'm glad we did this," she said. "Together." "Me too." They stood there, once divided by decades, now sharing the space between houses. The pool shimmering behind them was no longer a statement of defiance, but a promise. They had agreed to begin again, but lingering beneath the new calm was a quiet question. Could the past ever fully let go of them? The journey isn't easy, but it's one we can take together. Morning light filtered through sheer curtains into the living room I now shared with my daughter. Jenna sat beside me, porcelain cup in hand, both of us slow to speak, as if the morning held its breath. The mint green wall behind her felt calm, fresh paint, hopeful tone, and I realized how much distance we'd journeyed to sit here, that still together. We'd started with silence, moved through reluctance, and were now learning to speak again, not as mother and daughter in old roles, but as two people rebuilding trust. Each conversation felt fragile and brave. By mid-morning, we were walking through the gardens at the little conservatory downtown. We laughed at a fountain's splash. We shared memories of her childhood, first bike ride, the ice cream truck, after-school crafts. We checked our phones when the water tickled our toes, not to forward messages, but to confirm we were there, alive in the same space. Later at a cafe, she reached across the table and tucked a stray hair behind my ear. "Thank you," she said softly, "for letting me in." The words weighed heavy, but true. Back home, the renovations were done. The house felt complete. Warm lighting, soft rugs, photographs of travel we'd yet to take, canvases from my neglected art days hanging alongside photos of her as a child, both worlds visible, coexisting. We shared a kitchen for the first time without a script. Tonight, she made risotto. I sliced crusty bread, the herbs we'd planted in the garden earlier, arranged in a small vase between us. No old patterns, no sense of one serving the other, just two women cooking dinner together in a space they made. At dusk, we sat by the pool, feet dangling into the cool water. The surface rippled gold and violet under the setting sun. This pool used to mean defiance. Now it felt like connection. Blue light bridging two lives side by side. She looked at me, vulnerable. I was terrified that I'd end up unhappy, resentful, alone. I paused, then said, "That's not your future now." She smiled, but it trembled. "I see your strength," she said, "and I want to build something too, not just for me, but with you." My throat tightened. I had taught her everything, her boundaries, her courage, and now she stood beside me, not behind me. We planned our first trip together, a weekend getaway into the mountains, not with friends or partners, just us, new memories, different laughter. As darkness fell, I returned to my home, pausing at my window. The pool glowed like a beacon, soft and sure. Inside, the living room smelled of lavender and wood. The house held both our touches, cushions she picked, paintings I painted. Music drifted from the kitchen, where she washed dishes and hummed softly. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the steady hum of a life made, a life she and I had rebuilt together. I did it all, not for revenge, not to punish, but so we could rebuild on truth. Quiet swelled inside me, mixing with gratitude and tremors of vulnerability, because this relationship wasn't healed. It was becoming something new, something real, and I needed to remember that, while every day felt like a triumph, every day also carried risk that old patterns might return, or that one day one of us might still walk away. But for now, we were here. Lena rested her hand on the window pane, gazing out at the pool glowing under the moonlight. Across the way, Jenna's light was on too, no longer hidden behind curtains. They had stepped into a new rhythm. But as Lena exhaled, she wondered, now that they were standing together, what would come next? We've both changed, and I can't wait to see what happens next. We sat side by side on the garden bench, our knees nearly touching, as Jenna scribbled into her notepad with a determination I recognized as my own. The list she was making was titled in bold letters, New Family Tradition. Underneath she'd written, Mountain Cabin every summer, Thanksgiving with homemade pie, no store-bought crusts, one photo together each month, no filters. I think we should frame the first one by the pool, she said, glancing at me. The day we planted the roses, I nodded, with dirt under our fingernails and sweat on our necks. Real. She smiled, not the tight, polished smile of months ago, but something softer, more human. The house had grown warmer somehow, not by temperature but in spirit. We played music in the kitchen. We left the front door open while we cooked. She invited Margot over for tea. I called Tanya just to talk. The air between us no longer buzzed with unspoken resentment. That afternoon, we hosted a small brunch in the sunroom. Just old friends, casual plates of fruit and warm quiche, Jenna pouring mimosas with practiced ease. Someone asked her how she was adjusting, and she looked at me before answering. I'm learning, she said simply. Later, when we were doing dishes, she turned to me and said, I treated you unfairly for a long time. I met her eyes. We both did things we thought were right, but I didn't see you, she continued. Not really. I made you small so I could feel big, and now I see how much space you deserve. Tears prickled my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. You're seeing yourself now too, I said. And she was. The pool had become our evening ritual. Sometimes we swam, sometimes we just sat beside it, sipping tea or sharing quiet stories. The blue lights glowed beneath the surface like a quiet heartbeat, steady and beautiful. One night, as we floated on inflatable loungers, she said, I want to take you to Paris. I laughed. Paris? You've always wanted to go. I remember you used to sketch that little bridge over the Seine. I smiled. And you'd crayon hearts all over it. Still might. The next morning, she sent me a text from the other side of the house. Flight deals to France. May, June. I walked over with my coffee and nodded. But that weekend we went to a travel shop downtown, looking at maps and guidebooks, laughing like teenagers. She picked a bright red suitcase. I chose navy blue. The day we booked the trip, we toasted with sparkling cider on the deck. To new beginnings. To staying curious, I added. We clinked glasses. The pool glistened below, still as ever, but it no longer felt like a message aimed at her. It felt like part of the story we were now writing together. She painted a canvas that afternoon, her first attempt since college. Bold lines, messy color, a skyline imagined. I watched in quiet pride as she stepped into something new. That night, we danced barefoot in the living room, old records spinning. She twirled me once, then twice, and we collapsed onto the couch in breathless laughter. You're really fun when you're not trying to be, she teased. You're really sweet when you forget to be defensive, I replied. We both laughed. The walls around us held it all. The newness, the weight, the joy, and for once there was no need to look back. Lena and Jenna curled into the armchairs they'd picked together, legs tucked up, coffee mugs in hand. Outside, the pool shimmered like a shared memory. They looked at each other, wide-eyed, hope the past no longer haunted them. And for the first time in a long time, they knew the best was still to come. Just when I thought we were finally moving forward, something happened that made me question everything. The envelope came on a Thursday, white, slim, clean lettering across the front, in Jenna's handwriting. I found it resting on the hallway table next to the mail basket, and for a second, I thought it might be a thank you note for Paris, but when I opened it, the weight of the page told me otherwise. It wasn't a card, it was a letter, a university, out of state, out west. She was offered a position, something prestigious in design and communications, full salary, housing support, a fresh start. I stood frozen in the hallway, reading the words twice, before I even looked toward the kitchen where she hummed over her tea. She hadn't said a word. When I walked in, envelope in hand, she stopped humming. I was going to tell you, she said, eyes wide but not surprised. I wasn't sure how. I sat at the table slowly. Is this what you want? She hesitated. It's what I used to want. Before, when everything felt like pressure and escape was the only way forward. But now, I asked gently. She looked away. Now it feels like a test. I exhaled slowly, the realization cutting deeper than I expected. This was the fork in the road, the end of the chapter I hadn't realized we were still in. Jenna's offer meant she would have to go, soon, and not just physically, emotionally. She'd be gone from the rhythms we'd just started to cherish. I wanted to scream, to tear the letter in two, but all I said was, "It's a good opportunity." She nodded. "It is." The days that followed passed in slow motion. We still made dinner together, still floated in the pool, still shared music, and talked about what colors to paint the laundry room. But beneath every sentence was the steady beat of a clock ticking down. She brought home travel books again, but this time for another state, not another country. I noticed how her list started changing. Fewer we plans, more I should probably ones. I didn't stop her, but inside I unraveled. One evening, she came into the living room with her laptop open and sat cross-legged on the couch. "Mom," she said softly, "it's not that I want to leave you." I nodded, trying to keep my face steady. "It's that I want to see who I am, without everything I used to fear." "I know," I whispered. Her eyes welled up. "But what if it all falls apart again?" I reached over, brushing her cheek with my thumb. "Then you'll know how to rebuild, because you've done it before." She smiled through tears. "With you." We spent the weekend packing a few of her things. Not all, just enough, just in case. Her suitcase was back in the hallway, the same bright red one we bought for Paris, now half filled with cardigans and printed blouses. In the middle of the night I stood in her room and watched her sleep, her breath slow, the moonlight sliding over her comforter. She looked younger, like the child I remembered, but quieter now, wiser, her own. The next morning, she came to the porch where I was having coffee. She leaned into my side, her head on my shoulder. "You think we'll be okay?" she asked. "I think we already are," I said. We watched the pool together, still, luminous, no drama, no defiance. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I admitted. "But I'm going." Lena walked her daughter to the car, suitcase trailing behind them. The morning was still thick with memory. As Jenna turned the key and waved from the driver's seat, Lena smiled, but it cracked at the edges. She had supported her daughter's flight, but standing on the curb, alone now, she realized letting go was harder than she'd ever imagined. Life is about the moments we create, and the ones we choose to let go. The morning Jenna left, the sky wore that soft blue that only comes after a long rain. The lawn sparkled faintly, the pool was still, and I stood in the doorway, coffee cooling in my hands, watching her load the last box into the back seat. She looked back once, not dramatic, just a glance to make sure I was still there. I was. She didn't need help buckling the suitcase or checking her lip. She had done that part. What she needed now was permission to leave and trust she could return. When she walked back up the path to hug me, neither of us cried. "You've given me more than a house," she whispered. "You gave me back myself." I held her for a moment longer, her heartbeat soft against mine. "Keep it," I said, "and don't give it away again." She smiled. "I'll text when I land." And just like that she was gone. The house echoed for a few days, not loudly, just enough to remind me it had been. There were still her fingerprints on the hallway mirror, a sweatshirt folded in the laundry room, her toothbrush in the second drawer, like a promise she hadn't said aloud. I didn't clean it out. Instead, I walked the yard. I sat beside the pool. I pulled out an old canvas and started painting again, not to forget her, but to remember myself. There was work to do. A gallery in town had asked if I'd consider showing pieces in the fall. I'd said maybe. Now I was thinking yes. Margot called with her usual bluntness. So what's next? Redecorating again? Or running for mayor? I laughed. Neither. I think I'll just be. There was a rhythm to the quiet now. I played music in the afternoons. Nothing dramatic. Just slow jazz and old folk songs. I cooked for one. I lit candles even when no one was visiting. And every night I stepped out to the pool. It was no longer a battleground. No longer a message. Just a body of water beneath the stars. I swam some evenings. Others I just floated. I thought about who I'd been when I first stepped onto this land. Angry, displaced, half alive. And who I'd become. Rooted, weathered, wide awake one afternoon. A letter came in Jenna's handwriting. No email, no text, just a real letter. Inside was a photo. The two of us in front of the rose bushes, dirt-stained and radiant, and beneath it, her words. Mom, I miss you already, and I'm finally okay with missing someone, because I know it means they mattered. I pressed the photo to my chest. I no longer needed to win. I didn't need to be the hero, or the mother or the builder of other people's dreams. I was enough. That weekend, I hosted a brunch of my own, just a few neighbors, some new friends, and artists I'd met downtown. There was laughter, real, round laughter that filled the corners of the house. After they left, I lit a single lantern beside the pool. Its reflection glimmered on the surface, dancing gently like a heart. Lena stood at the window, one hand resting on the frame, watching dusk settle over the pool. Jenna was miles away, chasing a new chapter, but her presence lingered in the garden beds. The tea mugs, the playlist still queued up on the stereo. The past had folded neatly behind her, and ahead, nothing but open sky and shimmering water. Sometimes the hardest part of life is not letting go, but learning to embrace what's next. Morning light spilled into the living room, and I watched the pool ripple as a breeze teased the surf. A paddle boat floated idle, its pastel paint chipped in places. It had been Jenna's. She'd paddle out, laughing as I sketched her silhouette. Now it bobbed alone, a quiet echo of our journey. I made myself coffee, and opened an email from the gallery, an invitation to show my paintings in a local exhibit next autumn. It felt like a turning point, one I hadn't dared imagine. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped shrinking and started creating again. By mid-morning, I walked to the conservatory where a small group of former classmates were exhibiting their work. They saw me across the room, and waved. I approached cautiously, then with steady confidence. We talked about art, and life, and someone asked what I'd been working on. I smiled at the memory of Jenna's coral wall, the music-filled kitchen, the garden where we planted roses. I said I'd built a life that finally felt mine. Later I drove the old road up into the hills. The sky stretched wide overhead, and the scent of pine drifted in the air. I stopped by a lookout point, and sketched again lines filled with light, space, and possibility. I thought of all I'd lost and all I'd gained. Strength, rootedness, a life fully chosen. When I returned home, Jenna's suitcase sat by the door. She'd visited the previous weekend, and we'd filled it again, this time with new memories, photo albums, small paintings, laughter tucked into the corners of tissue paper. She left a handwritten note next to it. I'm okay, and I'm grateful. Until next time, I owe you sunset photos from my new city. I folded it carefully, and placed it in a journal I kept beside the living room lamp. The garden looked mellow in late afternoon gold. The lavender bloomed, the foxglove nodded, in rhythm with the breeze, and the pool reflected crease-free sky. I slipped off my shoes, and walked the narrow path around it, fingertips grazing the water. It was never just water. It had become something else, a symbol, a declaration, a space for reclamation and creation. That evening, I hosted friends again, not to prove anything, but to celebrate nothing more than just this moment. There was pasta made from scratch, red wine, quiet jazz playing, stories exchanged in low voice. We talked about new beginnings, resilience, small victories. I laughed more than I had in years, and when the group left, I lingered outside, sipping the last of the wine as dusk slipped into night. No longer tense, no longer guarded, just open. Once the porch light came on, the lantern beside the pool flickered on too, its glow bent softly across the water. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, music low and gentle in the back. I found my old sketchbook and turned to the page where I'd drawn the sign bridge, all those years ago. My hand traced the lines, and I thought of our plan, the trip we never took, and the new ones we might. A few hours later, I rose from the couch and pulled on my coat. I stepped outside again, walking along the fence line that no longer divided us, but connected our properties, now symbols of a shared bond. The air smelled faintly of lavender and wood smoke. I inhaled deeply. I paused at the pool's edge. Ice lanterns glimmered in the shallow lights, reflecting a sky jeweled with stars. I leaned on the railing, heart steady. Whatever the future held, I knew this moment belonged to me, not by right, not by accident, but by choice. Lena stepped away from the pool, leaving the water shimmering in the moonlight behind her. She didn't look back, not out of sorrow, but respect. She had reclaimed her life, and now stepping into the future felt less like a leap and more like walking into sunrise.